I'm very, very pleased and honored to be having a conversation this evening with someone I admire very much, also a very dear friend. Please welcome the director of Monrovia, Indiana, and many other great films, Frederick Wiseman. Fred, I have to say that I was struck last night when we were doing or yesterday when we were doing the Q&A for Monrovia, that many of the questions that you get about your work over a span of many years tend to have a certain sameness to them. About the presence of the camera, does it affect the action? That's one that comes up fairly often. And also about people, more recently, people trying to resist the impulse to act in front of the camera. Your answer to that is very interesting. Yeah, but it's also really interesting because you think that people nobody's really that good an actor.
Well, I mean, I don't think, people don't have the capacity to become somebody different that quickly. If they did, there'd be no need for psychotherapists. And you know, my little joke is not everybody's Meryl Streep, and thank God. But the sequence I used to illustrate my point of view about that is a sequence from Law and Order, which was a film shot in 1968 with the Kansas City, Missouri police. And there's in Kansas City at the time, in order to make an arrest for prostitution, the police had to have a price and an act. So it required the undercover policeman to pick up a woman, go back to the hotel, undress, and presumably at the last minute make the arrest. The undercover policeman did that, started to lead the woman down the stairs of the seedy hotel. She knocked him down the stairs and fled. He took out his walkie-talkie and called a Vice Squad car, and we were in the Vice Squad car. Came to the hotel, and the bellboy said she fled to the basement. And I happened to have a stun gun. Can you hear me all right? Is it? Yeah. I happened to have a stun gun, which is an artificial light, with me that night, and the police found her hiding under the chairs, some old chairs in the basement, and dragged her out, and one of the policemen started to strangle her. And another policeman was holding her arms. And after about 20 seconds, they let her go. And she said to the policeman who was holding her arms, he, referring to the strangler, was trying to strangle me, and the other policeman said, "Oh no, you're just imagining it." And we, the viewers, have seen the effort in the film. But I'm not bringing this up to illustrate police violence, but as an example, as an extreme example, why I think the camera doesn't change behavior. I mean, you could argue that if we hadn't been there filming, the policeman would have killed her, but I don't think that's the case, because he says to her, one of the policemen says to her at that point, "Don't fuck with our boys. Next time you get picked up for prostitution," next time you get picked up, he didn't say prostitution, "go down to the station house, pay your $50 fine, get fingerprinted, your picture will be taken, and you'll be back on the street in a half an hour. But don't fuck with our boys." So I think the policeman was strangling her for 20 or 30 seconds because he felt that he had to punish her for knocking his buddy down the stairs, and he felt that was a completely appropriate thing to do under the circumstances. And I think it's an extreme example of what's characteristic of all of us, in the sense we act appropriately for the situation that we're in. Mm-hmm. And that policeman thought, well, and he obviously knew he was being photographed and recorded, but he thought that was okay. But we all, I think by and large, think our behavior is okay, but don't necessarily see it the way somebody else sees it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the illustration that I use in response to the question of, does the camera change behavior? And I think by and large, if people don't want their picture taken, they go like this or they walk away. If they agree, they go about their business.
Yeah. And are there cases, I would imagine that there are, when you start filming people and you get into situations where they are very self-conscious at first in front of the camera and then lose the self-consciousness?
But that doesn't
You don't use it in the movie.
That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very rare that anybody refuses to be photographed.
Yep.
It's very rare that anybody asks for the camera. When you're making documentaries, you're in no different position than anybody else who meets a lot of people, whether you're a teacher or a used car salesman or a doctor or whatever profession you have. In order to survive, you have to have a good bullshit meter. And if I think that somebody's acting for the camera, I mean, I like to think I have a good bullshit meter. If I think somebody's acting for the camera, I stop.
Yeah.
And if I don't realize it till I get to the editing room, I don't use it. But in my experience, it happens so infrequently as to not be a problem.
Yeah. It kind of raises the issue, or it's related to the issue, I think, of the degree to which your work is constructed. You, for instance, were talking last night about the fact that when you're filming an event like the town council meetings or the town planning meetings, right, planning commission meetings in Monrovia, Indiana, you have your cameraman, you direct him to shoot participants when they're just kind of reacting to stuff that you know you're not going to use, so that you'll have cutaways.
Well, the film is completely constructed.
Right.
I would really make the argument that it's just another form of fiction, and the distinction between fiction and documentary that's traditionally made, I think, is completely, I mean, in many ways is completely arbitrary, because, you know, we're all trying to make movies. And I prefer that word than documentary, which is sort of a tame, stale word, you know, which to me carries the connotation, you know, it's a documentary and therefore it's good for you to see it. It's a bit like X-Lax. So, you know, I prefer to say that I make movies. But the making of one of my movies is the reverse of the making of a fiction film. A fiction film, you do a script, you do a storyboard, and 95% of what's shot is figured out in advance. For my films, I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't even know the themes of the film. I take the gamble that if I hang around a place long enough, I'll find enough sequences out of which I can construct a film. I have no idea of the point of view. I have no idea of the themes. That all emerges as a consequence of the editing. I don't, the sequences in the final film, the order of the sequences in the final film have absolutely nothing to do with the order in which they're shot. I may begin the film on something on the first day and then something on the last day. Frequently, an event in the film will be an hour and a half. Say some of the meetings in Ex Libris, some of the meetings of the president of the library with his senior staff. It might be an hour and a half. I may end up using 8 minutes in the film. That 8 minutes is not a consecutive 8 minutes. It's 2 minutes here, 30 seconds there, 20 seconds there, a minute and a half there, edited together to appear as if it's taking place the way you're watching it. But that's, to the extent that the sequence works, it works because it's a fiction, which gives you the illusion, or for 20 seconds or so, that it took place the way you're watching it. So my job, I'm giving a long answer to the question, but my job as the editor is I have to think that I understand what's going on in every sequence. I mean, whether I'm right or wrong, in a sense, almost is irrelevant. But I have to think that I understand what's going on in a sequence, because if I don't understand what's going on, I can't make the decision whether I want to use it. I won't know how to cut it down to a usable form, and I won't know where to place it in the structure of the film. So whether I'm right or I'm wrong, I have to convince myself that I have that understanding in order to make the thousands of decisions that are involved in finding the film.
Mm-hmm. And in compressing things.
Compressing, well,
yeah.
for Monrovia, for example, I had 120 hours of rushes.
Mm-hmm.
The final film is 2 hours and 20 minutes. So, I don't know, I haven't done the math, but it's a shooting ratio of about 57 to 1.
Yeah.
So that, I'm using roughly 1% of the material.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that 120 hours often seems, when you say it, like to some people, a very daunting figure, but it's common, right?
Well,
that's the ratio. That's
I'm
the work.
accustomed to it. It's a daunting. But I know from past experience the way you get the film done is sit in the chair, get fed intravenously till it's done.
Yeah. That's why Truffaut said that films are made in a fugue state. Oh, sorry. You okay? Yeah. I was really, when we were just looking at the first couple minutes of Monrovia just now, the thing that really, and it struck me the first time I saw it, but even more dramatically this time, just in those first few minutes, was the sound edits in the opening as you're setting up the sense of place. And I think that sound editing has definitely become, that's something that's really benefited from the digital advance, right?
First of all, they had a very good sound man.
Yeah. What's the name of your sound man in France, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's your sound man?
His name is Fred Wiseman.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean your mixer.
Well, the mixer is Emmanuel Crozet.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
No, I work very hard in this sound, both in recording it and in preparing for the mix.
Yeah, but in terms of the fluidity of the images and the montage, as you're setting up the town, and this is true of the way that you move in and out of different scenes.
Well,
and,
you try. You learn over the years, and the effort is to create the illusion, however transitory, that one thing does lead to another. And that it's meant to be that way, when of course it didn't happen that way, and the sound overlaps, the connections, the use of the sound between sequences is extremely important to the extent one is successful in achieving that illusion.
Yeah. When you made Monrovia, Indiana, when you approached the subject, I guess that this is a question that's probably going to come up a lot and probably has already. Did you decide, gee, I want to make a movie in Trump country?
Well, I didn't quite think of it that way. I wanted to, partially that's so. I wanted to make a movie in a small town in the Middle West, which was primarily an all-white community.
Mm-hmm. So
that's okay. That's Trump.
And you shot it. And you shot it in early 2017. You shot it in early 2017.
In the spring and early summer of 2017.
Yeah.
And Monrovia did vote, according to Wikipedia, 65% for Trump. But there was no conversation about politics that I heard while I was there. And I don't think people were evasive. I think they just didn't talk about it, because most of the time you're around, they're not shooting, and you're not shooting. But I think political issues are implicit in both the structure and the sequences, the choice of sequences in the film. In the same way, Ex Libris, I didn't make Ex Libris as a political film. I finished it 2 days after Trump was elected, but because Trump represents the opposite of everything the library stands for, learning, enlightenment, helping people, aid to immigrants, general preserving history, scientific experiment, conserving art, etc.
You can keep going if you want, because
it instantly becomes an it instantly becomes a political film.
Yeah. And something else that does a kind of question that arises around your films fairly often is the themes. And of course, the themes for you are what you find when you're shooting. They emerge in the editing. Right.
No, I really, I have no idea before I start what the themes or the point of view are going to be. And they only emerge at the end of the editing, because when I start the editing, I look at all the rushes, put aside about, after 6 or 8 weeks viewing the rushes, put aside about half of them. Then over the next 6 or 8 months, edit all the sequences that I think might make it into the final film. And it's only when all the so-called candidate sequences are in close to final form that I begin to work in the structure. And I make the first assembly in 3 or 4 days, because at that point all the sequences are available, and I think I know them very well, and I can make changes quickly and experiment. And the first version of the film comes out is usually 30 or 40 minutes longer than the final version. Then over another 6 or 8 weeks, I work on the internal rhythm within the sequences and the transitions between the sequences, and work very hard on trying to find the dramatic structure, which is one of the ways that I express my point of view toward the material. And then when I think the film is finished, I go back, in the case of Monrovia, look at all the 120 hours all over again to make sure that there's nothing that I discarded that I might now find useful because of the editorial decisions I made. And I always find a sequence or transition shots that I had put aside which solve a problem that I didn't think I had adequately resolved. And then the film is finished.
At what point do you start showing the film to other people?
I don't show it to other people till it's finished. I did in the beginning when I first started.
That was not helpful.
After the Civil War.
Yeah.
But I found it extremely confusing because, and I always thought whatever somebody else said was right.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing it. And one of the things I've learned over the years is just to trust my own judgment, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
That's all that I know, and
Yeah.
It doesn't help me to ask. I mean, I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. It's the right way to do it for me.
Yeah. How many films in before you dropped that practice?
One.
Yeah. I'm sure that, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you ever get the urge to go back and look at your older films?
No.
Yep.
No. I mean, occasionally, if I
when they're being screened,
if I have to give a talk, sometimes
yeah.
I might go back and look at it high speed or read the transcript. But I've looked at it so many times in the course of the editing that I really, once it's done,
yeah,
I have no.
You don't want to experience it with an audience.
And I also tend to remember, at a time when I can't remember my own name, I remember the films quite well.
Yeah. Is there another film? Are you working on a film now?
No, I'm not. Well, I hope I'll do another one in the next couple of months. But at the moment, I have the rights to a play by Will Eno called The Realistic Joneses, and I'm trying to put on a production of it in France, in French.
Yeah.
So that's my next big project. I mean, I'm going back to France in a couple of weeks because we have a reading of the film for some theaters, and I hope it'll be selected and put on in the season 2019-20 in Paris.
You've been living the expatriate's life over there for a while, huh?
Yeah, the food's good in Paris.
Yeah. And also in France, doing a fair share of acting, I might add. Oh, come on. No.
Putting it, I mean, I had
Little
a small part in a TV
Nicolas
series,
Sada.
and I had a small part in an 8-minute movie,
come on now.
and I'm a cutaway in another movie.
And you were brilliant in all of them.
A brilliant career.
Even though they cut all your dialogue out of the last one.
I put it all on my resume.
But are there? I know that. You're saying that for Monrovia, Indiana, you said that you wanted to make a movie in the heartland, right, at that particular moment in time. Does that kind of desire to I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is I know that you're often presented with the opportunity to film specific places, as in the case of Boxing Gym, because you met someone who, knew of this place, you went there, you decided. But are there other instances of films where you're actually drawn to going to a particular place or examining a particular kind of activity?
Well, most of the films, I mean, for example, I want to do a film about department stores. So in my mind, the department store in America was Neiman Marcus, so I called up Neiman Marcus. For the film that became Model, I was in the dentist's office one day reading, which is the only place I read People magazine, or admit to reading People magazine, and there was an article about a model agency, and I was 48, and I figured that was the right age to do a movie about a model agency. And so I called up a couple of model agencies, and they both said yes, and I picked one. But I mean, for some reason or other, I have several ideas, and then one of them appeals to me for one reason or another at the moment, and I can gin up enough enthusiasm to want to do it.
Yeah, and it's whether it's doable or not too.
And sometimes it takes place in a building, a single building like Welfare. Sometimes it's a rather large geographical area like Monrovia, and sometimes it's a couple of buildings. I mean, because this perhaps phony notion of an institutional series, because I have no precise definition of institution except really a place that interests me and has existed for a while and has geographical boundaries of some sort or another, but I have a very fluid idea of what's a geographical boundary, because I mean, Monrovia is over a large territory. Belfast, Maine is a canal zone, and on the end, Welfare is in one building.
And Ex Libris is a New York,
Ex Libris is
a
all
New York
over,
movie.
3 boroughs.
Yep. I want to do something that I had thought about that came up in a conversation a few years back when you were talking about a book that you had read by Helen Vendler about poetry. I think probably about Stevens, maybe, or
Well,
I'm
I
not
mean,
sure.
she's got a great book about Emily Dickinson.
About Emily Dickinson.
And the book about Shakespeare's sonnets. I mean, she's a terrific critic.
Oh, but I don't remember which book it came up in, but you said that you had read there was something that Helen Vendler had written about poetic structure that for you was a real lesson.
Well, no, I mean, it's just that in reading her analysis of poems, I learned a lot about the structure of poems, and it made, I mean, there's not a direct transfer, and it would be presumptuous for me to say there's a direct transfer, but it helped me clarify my effort to think about the structure of movies, because I worked very hard on the structure of the movies. It's not, the order of the sequences in the film is nothing to do with chance. The shooting is all organized around chance, and the editing is the reverse. I mean, editing is talking to yourself, and since I enjoy talking to myself, I have to, what's involved in the editing is, no matter, even if I've arrived at a cut because I've dreamt it, which has happened, or I thought of it in the shower, editing, I have to be able to rationalize, I have to be able to explain to myself why every shot is there, what its relationship is to the shot that precedes it or follows it, how the first 10 minutes of the film is related to the last 10 minutes of the film. And if I can't do that, there's a problem. So and even though I may have arrived at the cut in non-rational ways, I have to explain the choices I make to myself.
Yeah. Maybe open it up for questions from the audience. And so this gentleman's hand went right up. So wait a minute. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
Hi there. This is a question about shooting. When you've made your films, do you only use one camera? Have you ever used more than one camera?
No. Only there's 90 seconds of La Danse, which was shot with a second camera. The end, the graduation ceremony in basic training, I had 2 cameras. And for juvenile court, the sequences in the courtroom, there was a second camera which was in a fixed position with a 1,000-foot magazine, which means it could run for about 30 minutes, and it was focused on a judge. because it was impossible to cover the judge, the defense lawyer, the prosecuting lawyer, and the witness with one camera. But so set up the camera in the back of the courtroom. It was always running, was always on the judge, and we covered everybody else in the usual way. Those are the only times.
Related to that question, by the way, the other night you were talking about your relationship with your cameraman, John Davey, which goes back many years, and how you guys have it all down to a series of signals.
Well, we work very closely together. John is a great cameraman, and we have signals that we use. I pick out, we get shot. We look at rushes almost every night. We have pretty standard ways of shooting certain kinds of events because we've done it. I mean, for a meeting, for example, you need wide shots, and you need to have shots behind the person that's chairing the meeting, and you shoot cutaways when the meeting gets somewhat boring, and you're always prepared to go back to whoever is speaking, because and you have to be all ready. It's a terrible mistake to try and stop and start, because inevitably it's the only rule that applies. If you think that something interesting is not going to happen, or you're bored, and you turn off the camera, that's the moment when the most interesting thing happens.
I went to City College Film School. You may know the Dave Davidson, why his parents named him Dave Davidson, I don't know, but you may know of him. I don't know. But anyway, he made sure we saw Titicut Follies, your first film, right? And then followed by High School. We analyzed those, so that was interesting. And I never got to meet you till now. But that was back in the early 90s. But I'm wondering who the filmmakers that inspired you, and maybe to this day, is there anyone that really makes you, turn your head around even now?
I have arthritis in my neck. But I don't watch many movies because I don't have time. And I think, I got started at a time a few years after the technological advances which made it possible to shoot sync sound documentaries were made. And there was a film that I saw called Mooney versus Fowl, it's sometimes called Football, about two high school teams in Miami getting ready for a championship game. And that sort of illustrated to me the possibilities of the technique. And so I then informed myself about it. And when a couple of years after that, when I wanted to start making movies, I, use that technique, and have done it. I mean, the technique has been the same from the beginning. Small crew, handheld camera, camera, tape recorder, and an assistant who changes the mags when we shot on film, and now changes the cards. But there are fiction filmmakers that there's a lot of. Oh yeah, lots of. In terms of documentary filmmakers, the documentary filmmaker I admire the most is Marcel Ophuls. Sorrow and the Pity, Hotel Terminus. It's a completely different style than mine, but he made brilliant movies, and unfortunately hasn't worked for a while. But I think I've learned more about how to make a movie from the books I've read than the movies I've seen. Because I think whatever the format is, the abstract issues are the same. They're issues of the passage of time, characterization, abstraction, and whether you're writing a novel or writing a play or writing a poem, you're dealing with those issues, and I'm dealing with those issues all the time in making the movies. And I don't think there's any one-to-one relationship between reading a book and something I do in a movie, but generally speaking, when I read, I think of how those problems are solved in the novel I'm reading or the poem I'm reading, and then so that makes me more aware of how to try and resolve similar issues, but in a different way in making a movie. So I think my movies are more novelistic than they are journalistic, for example, particularly in terms of the structure.
Yes, sir. I want to ask you about what you said about forming an opinion about the presentation. And I'm going to ask you about a movie that occurred over 50 years ago, and it was High School USA. Can you recollect that movie? High School USA.
You mean Fred's movie, High School?
Yeah.
Just High School. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There may have been another one, High School
So
USA,
you're
but
saying
mine's
forming
just
an,
high school.
but
Well,
the
it
question
just so happened that I went to that high school, and in your presentation, I thought, I could be wrong, but I thought that you were presenting a high school as a place where children learn patriotism, Americanism, and that they were preparing us to fight in Vietnam. Is that correct?
well, so the question is that, in this gentleman's opinion, the way that you were presenting the school in high school, which he went to,
Northeast High, right.
was that people were being taught patriotism and that they were being prepared for Vietnam, right?
Yes.
Well, you may feel that way because the principal of the school at the end of the film reads a letter from a recent graduate who is in Vietnam, and he writes the letter before he says he's going to be dropped behind the demilitarized zone, and in case he's killed, he wants to leave his insurance money to the school. I think this is an example of a structural or thematic issue. I think that letter is placed at the end of the film, not so much as an attitude to the war in Vietnam, although I think that's implicit, but as a suggestion that one product of this high school is the uncritical and rather unthinking acceptance of the need to fight a stupid war like the war in Vietnam.
Yes. I'd like to reassure you that most of us didn't go to Vietnam. We, in fact, went to anti-war rallies.
In fact, this gentleman says that he and most of his friends did not go to Vietnam, but they went to anti-war rallies.
They went?
Anti-war rallies.
Ah. Well, but it's not, that letter at the end of the film was not a critique of the students. It was a critique of the attitude of the principal.
Yep, sir, right there.
I thought you might like to know that you have a kindred spirit in Umberto Eco. You say that you make movies. He has said and written that he writes, that doesn't write fiction, which he did, or nonfiction, papers on semiotics and so forth, that there's a continuum. At one end, there's poetry, which you obviously admire, which gets most of its import from sound and rhythm, and at the other end, there's, I don't know, writing about semiotic academic papers or legal writing or something, and that is also writing. They're all creating artificial, if you like, imagined worlds, which is what you do. I wonder if you see films as a spectrum in that way, the fiction in one place and what you do in another?
You know, I don't think in those terms. You know, I understand that some people do, and I'm in no way critical of thinking in those terms. I just don't think that way. I mean, it's not a question that occurs to me.
Hi. So I attempt to make films, and this last year I failed pretty terribly at making a documentary, and it was a very difficult experience. But I would be really curious to hear if you feel that you have failed at any point, and how that failure has been a part of your creative process or a part of your career. And maybe you haven't failed, but if you have failed in some way, I'd love to hear about it.
It's a good question. It's a question about failure. This gentleman tried to make a documentary, he said, and failed miserably at it. That's crushing, but but something to be learned from. And the question is, do you have any failures that you experienced and that you drew from?
Not that I think I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean that as a film is not a failure. But you know, I may be more self-delusional than you are.
What was the nature of your failure, if I might ask?
Just yeah, a series of kind of. It was a very difficult subject matter. It was on male sex work in Quito, in Ecuador, and it just became my initial idea didn't pan out, and then I had to kind of produce something for this NGO, and it began to involve a lot of people. And on my way home after a long shoot, I was robbed, and I lost a lot of the material, and wasn't able to finish that and kind of hold up my commitment.
Yeah.
But it was just became a very difficult but also inspiring time, and so I was just curious.
Yep. Anybody else here in the back? Yes.
Hi. I read recently that you worked for a time as a city planner or an urban planner, and I was wondering, well, first of all, if that's correct, and second, has that informed any of your films about cities or small towns?
So did you work as a city planner?
No, well, I worked from 1966 to 1970 in a consulting company, and one aspect of the consulting company, I didn't do city planning, but some of the other people did.
After you got
was
your
a
law
company
degree.
that profited off all the various government programs that were meant to aid poor people, and we were middle-class people who did very well off the programs. And then I stopped that as soon as I had an opportunity to work full-time making the movies.
But if you were around, I think the second part of the question is, if you were around city planning, let's say, did it inform your?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Did you chime in during the city
No,
planning scenes
I'm
in
not
Monrovia,
knocking city
Indiana?
planners, but I mean, I just didn't have that much to do with anybody doing city planning. There were people in the group, but that wasn't the part of the group that I was associated with.
Now you have to swing your head around because somebody over here is going to ask a question.
Hi. Yeah, I've read in interviews that you say that running sound and recording sound is more important than having the camera as the director. Can you talk a little bit about how you run sound now?
It's a question about sound. And he had made a remark, you said, that
Yeah,
sound was more important than...
An interview around the Titty Cup Follies when you say that being the sound person is more important as a director than having the camera.
Well, I like to do my own sound, but I mean, but
more important, or maybe that if you were your own cameraman, maybe
well,
you
no,
would find that a little...
I think what I said was that doing the sound gives me more flexibility to figure out what to shoot. I certainly don't think the sound is any more important than picture. I think they're equally important, because without good picture and good sound, you don't have a movie.
So when you're actually recording, does it look like you with a separate recorder kind of grabbing sound away from where your camera person is?
Away from where the camera person is?
Yeah, sorry if this is too technical. I'm just very interested.
It doesn't sound technical. It just sounds like, in other words, you're saying during the shooting, is he somewhere else grabbing sound?
Well, no,
right,
I mean,
yeah.
It's a comic little dance between us. I'm usually to the cameraman's left. My job is to get the mic in as close to the person that's speaking without being in the frame. And we sort of trying to figure out what the proper framing is. And sometimes there are radio mics, so I can be a bit further. But usually, the mic is just below the frame line or just above the frame line. And sometimes it's in the frame if you're not careful. But, I mean, we're always sort of fighting for position.
But that's okay if it's in the frame now, because you can always paint it out, right?
Yeah, well, but that's only the last few years.
Yeah, that's right. One more question. Yes, right there. Wait for the microphone. Yeah.
Is there a dream project that you want to do? Someone you've never worked with before, or maybe a topic that you want to discover?
Do you have a dream project?
A dream project?
I know that there was a certain newspaper.
The White House.
Currently?
Anytime, actually.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I mean, there seems to be pretty good material now.
Yeah, but it's all kind of coming out.
Yeah.
They're using it themselves. But there was a newspaper that you wanted to
Yeah, I never.
A certain newspaper that you
yeah, a
almost
certain
cracked.
newspaper, but they didn't give me permission. But subsequently, they gave a couple other people permission.
Uh-huh. But are there any other lingering dreams that you...
No. Well, if it were, I wouldn't tell you.
Okay, there we go. That's an excellent place to stop. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks, Fred.